afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's CPA Ontario Insight Speaker Series. I'm Carol Wilding, President and CEO of CPA Ontario. Now, judging by the overwhelming number of pre-submitted questions that we received from members and students, this conversation could not be more timely. You've asked us about CUSMA and the future of Canada-US trade. You asked about Canada's natural resource potential and infrastructure bottlenecks. And you asked about geopolitical risks. The quality of your questions reflects a simple fact. After a series of dramatic shocks, the invasion of Ukraine, the US administration's aggressive trade tactics and foreign policy, and our own stagnant economic growth, it has become clear that Canada can no longer take our security, prosperity, and sovereignty for granted. We are in a new geopolitical age. Trade agreements, security pacts, and strategic alliances, the foundation on which international order was built, can no longer be relied upon. Faced with the US administration's erratic tariff policy and the war in Iran threatening energy infrastructure and the Strait of Hormuz, global supply chains are being rerouted in real time. Nations are ramping up defense spending, protecting their own economic and strategic interests, and aggressively pursuing their own access to capital and markets. We know we are living in a more volatile, unstable, and unpredictable world. But knowing is only half the battle. The other half is to act. Now, Canada has many advantages. We can be the safe harbor, a refuge of certainty in an uncertain world. The campaign to bring the Defence, Security and Resilience Bank to Canada to help NATO and allied nations finance defence projects is just one example. But we can only be that safe harbor if we take action to rebuild our capacity here at home and shift away from old, outdated economic models that we know are no longer fit for purpose for us. We can become a reliable source of energy and other critical resources. We can harness data, IP, and AI, and support our world-class innovators and entrepreneurs to become the businesses of the future. And we can defend, build, and transform Canada's North. It will take bold and, frankly, long overdue action to establish new trade relationships, to get our resources to market, to reform our tax system, to put the policies and frameworks in place that will protect our sovereign data and drive investment in the commercialization of our intellectual property. But Canadians are ready. With instability abroad, the values of resilience, prudence, and trust have never been more important. Those are Canadian values, and they are at the core of what it means to be a CPA. By bringing your expertise in governance and ethics to drive the adoption of AI, supporting entrepreneurs so they can scale their ideas into international success stories, and by opening new markets for our resources, goods, and services, CPAs are building a stronger Canada. And we are helping CPAs understand their role through resources like our Trade and Growth Insights Hub, our CPA Ontario LinkedIn newsletter, and by bringing some of the sharpest minds to our Insight Speaker Series stage. Today is no exception. So it is my pleasure to welcome two of the most important voices in global affairs to help us understand this new geopolitical age and Canada's place in it. Rudyard Griffiths is the chair, organizer, and moderator of the Monk Debates. He's the publisher and co-founder of the digital news outlet The Hub, and the author of many articles and books, including Who We Are, A Citizen's Manifesto, a Globe and Mail Best Book of the Year. Now, joining Rudyard in conversation is Professor Janice Gross Stein. As the Belzberg Professor of Conflict Management in the Department of Political Science and the founding director of the Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the University of Toronto, fewer people have a better understanding of global issues and their impact on Canada than Professor Stein. She's a member of the Order of Canada, as well as the Order of Ontario, and has been awarded the Canada Council's Molson Prize for her outstanding contribution as a social scientist to public debate. Professor Stein is often featured on CBC, CTV, CNN, as well as the Globe and Mail and the National Post. So please welcome in conversation Professor Janice Gross Stein and Rudyard Griffiths.
Thank you, Carol, for that kind introduction, and welcome everyone to this important conversation. Carol and her team could not have picked a more important issue for us to dig in with you over the next 60 minutes. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to spend the first 40 minutes in conversation with Janice Gross Stein. I'll be asking her questions. Many of you submitted questions in advance, and I'll kind of work those into my conversation with her. Then in the final 20 minutes, we're going to take your questions. And I want to remind you that there is a button on your screen where you can begin putting in questions. As soon as you hear something that we say, those questions will come to me on this Slido, and we'll get to those as we hit 20 minutes to the top of the hour. So now, real pleasure to welcome into our conversation, Janice Gross Stein.
Thank you, Rudyard. And let me just say, what a great introduction by Carol. Hit all the issues that I think you and I are going to talk about, Rudyard.
Yeah. So let's begin, Janice, with something that you and I have been discussing over the last week as this extraordinary high-consequence conflict unfolds in the Middle East, and that's your language around a hinge moment, that what we're seeing right now, especially in the last 7 days as this conflict has escalated, is something that as a political scientist and someone with deep knowledge and area expertise in the Middle East worries you as a hinge moment. So what is a hinge moment? And why do you think we're seeing that in the context of this conflict? And what could it mean for helping us understand what might happen next?
You know, a hinge moment, Rudyard, is a moment that exposes the cracks in the existing ways we do things and pushes us to realize it's not sustainable the way it is. So what are those hinge moments? First of all, to be frank, we have a president in the United States who went to war with no consultations with allies, with no really deep staff work of the kind you need to undertake war. It's always a massive undertaking, but as we both said, people die. And therefore, there was a seriousness about that work, which was simply absent in that case. And thirdly, because this was a war in the Middle East, it always involves energy, the flow of energy, the production of energy through infrastructure. All of that is at stake. None of it was treated with the seriousness that it deserves, frankly. Now, if you're in Asia right now, you're worried because you are an energy consumer. If you live in the Gulf, you're worried because your safety is stunningly at risk in ways that you did not expect. If you're in Europe, you're worried because Russia has not gone away. The war in Ukraine continues. But you see, frankly, a shambolic performance by the President of the United States. And if you're in Canada, and I saved us for last, Rudyard, we live next door to the United States. We've long had deep trust, friendship, and at times great confidence in the leadership of the United States. It's really hard now to sustain that.
Mm-hmm. You know, a key thing that obviously CPAs try to constantly do for their clients is to assess risk, to try to come up with recommendations and strategies to manage risk. Janice, what do you see as the big risks right now? And bring that back to Canada, because already, you know, not only are we seeing higher energy prices at the pump, we are seeing bond yields tick up, most critically on the 5-year Canadian bond that resets this historic reset of mortgages that will go on this year. In other words, Janice, is a primary risk here that our audience needs to think about is the potential inflationary effects of this. Even if the war ended today, Janice, how concerned are you that these inflationary threats are being pump primed over the last 3 weeks, and there could be big consequences in the months to come?
So I'm going to answer that question, and then I'm going to make a provocative comment, if that's okay with you, Rudyard. So the answer to that question, this is the biggest energy shock we've had in the modern oil economy. and let's stop over that for a second. It is bigger than 1973 and 1979.
And you're saying already bigger, like right now, today.
Bigger today,
Okay.
if nothing else happens. If no additional energy infrastructure is destroyed in this war, it is already bigger. And it's not me that's saying that. It is the International Energy Agency that is saying that. The Straits of Hormuz remain closed with no credible plan, frankly, to reopen that. That is not a single military mission. This is a month of effort backed up by very solid diplomacy. So with the price of oil rising, and if you listen to the discussion that is going on in the Gulf and the Middle East, which I do, they're already talking about $175 a barrel for oil. That is what they are thinking forward on. I don't think it takes much of a leap of imagination with energy prices rising. And let's stop for a second over LNG, because that has been hit very badly.
Just the acronym LNG, liquefied natural gas. You got it.
Exactly. So it's not only an energy piece, but some of that goes into the advanced manufacture of a lot of things that all of us use, like computer chips, for example. So we're going to have, and we've seen this movie before, we're going to have inevitably, even if this war were to stop at the end of this week, which I don't think it will, but even if it were, we have a massive supply shock to the system.
Yeah, so important.
COVID was a massive supply shock. Let me say it again. That's what's coming. So we have to plan for inflation. We have to plan for disruption. And when this last happened to us on a much smaller scale in the 70s, that was, frankly, Rudyard, a big jolt to action, as Carol was saying. There was investment in alternative energy sources. There was investment in renewals. That's not been the case since this president came to office in the United States. But coming out of this, it seems almost, inconceivable to me that and Europe particularly and Asia will not take a very hard look at reducing their dependence on this single source where there's a choke point. Now, let me make the provocative comment. You said, what's the big risk? Okay, for CPAs. I'm going to say that we keep thinking in terms of risk, where we can estimate the probabilities and neglect uncertainties. And why does that matter? Because when you're in a world of uncertainty, which I believe we are, you can't actually estimate probabilities. You need new ways of thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, let's talk about that a little bit, how you might chunk that, a more nuanced way to think about risk. I noticed today, Janice, in the news, Russia is beginning to limit its exports of fertilizers, fertilizers manufactured through hydrocarbons. And the government of Qatar has declared force majeure with regards to its energy exports to various European countries, South Korea, and elsewhere. So that just, I think, backs up your contention that there is a big inflationary impulse coming through the system. So let's, because we also want to talk Canada-US relations, but just a little bit more on this war, because it really is top of mind, and I think it will have big consequences for us here in Canada the months to come. What happens next, Janice? We saw the president do a remarkable taco, enchilada, I don't know, you pick your favorite Mexican dish to explain what happened just before the opening of stock markets on Monday, saying in a sense that he was open to negotiation and would be limiting strikes for the period of 5 days. We have, though, Janice, subsequent to that, seen some pretty fierce rhetoric from key elements of the Revolutionary Guard, the military group that's really responsible for executing this war, saying there are no negotiations going on. If there would be negotiations, we want reparations for this illegal attack on our country undertaken the last time we were negotiating with you, the United States. So give us a level set, a temperature check on the likelihood right now, you think, of the president being able to wrestle this into some kind of extended negotiation that radically de-escalates this conflict?
So the way I'm going to answer that one, to make the point that I was making earlier, Roger, let's tell, because I don't know what the likelihood is, and anybody who tries to get into this president's head is proven wrong sooner or later, and it's usually sooner. Let's tell two stories, and you can chime in with me. What would be the best possible outcome here? And what would be the worst possible outcome? And that's, I think, the task for CPAs when they think forward about risk. Don't tell yourself only one story and put a number on it. Tell yourself two or tell yourself three, and then track the indicators for those stories to see which way events are trending. So let me tell you the best possible one, and then I'll tell you the worst one, and you can elaborate these stories. The best possible one, the president gets really lucky. There are elements in the Revolutionary Guard that recognize that the destruction of infrastructure inside Iran is going to make their life governing that country much more difficult. And quietly, they actually want this to stop. They go through the Pakistanis, and the Pakistanis are involved right now in discussions back and forth. And despite the rhetoric about, enrichment, ongoing enrichment and reparations, there is in fact a deal put on the table that looks a little worse for Trump than the deal they offered before negotiations broke off and President Trump went to war. That's a conceivable story, and it depends how much pressure internally the Revolutionary Guards really feel. That's a good story. Okay, here's the bad story. And they're both plausible. That's what I mean by thinking differently. Okay, just came out this morning that Prince Mohammed bin Salman has been calling Donald Trump repeatedly, even this week, and saying, go for it. Go for it. Despite their rhetoric, the Iranians are weak. We want this government gone. We will never have a stable Gulf as long as this regime is in power. Keep going. Don't stop. And Donald Trump listens to that, which is because we know that there's a close relationship between Mohammed bin Salman and Donald Trump's sons. He listens to that, and he decides he's going for one more round at least of escalation. He's going to run the oil price is already high enough that there's going to be inflation. Okay, let's take a chance and go one more round in an effort to get better terms. Both of those are plausible. So I'm a CPA. I've got to give advice to my clients. What do I do here? Well, I look, what would I be watching for if it's a good news story? What would I be watching for if it's a bad news story? I track the indicators. And I actually say to people, and I say it to government, and I say it to private sector leaders, I don't know right now, here's what's possible. Plan for both. Use strategies that will help you navigate across these two different worlds.
And it may be 3 or 4 different baskets that you chunk in terms of different outcomes that you assess, and then you're not attaching, Janice, to understand this methodology, you're not attaching hard bets or percentages. You're more saying, how do I manage for different outcomes, understanding that there will be a distribution of outcomes.
That's right.
As is the nature of everything.
That's exactly right. And you could say for me, Roger, it's a career-limiting move when a minister says to me, well, what's the likelihood? And I say, my first answer, I can't answer that question, but I can tell you 2 stories. And back comes to me, no, I want a likelihood. But actually, when you're advising CEOs or you're advising clients, the biggest trap in this world is false certainty because of the unpredictable nature, frankly, of the chief decision maker that we're dealing with here. So that's the trap that I think we need to resist more than anything else.
Some great questions are coming into the Slido. So again, I urge you to click on that little button at the top, send your questions in. We're going to get to those in the next 20 minutes. Janice, one more question on this war, and then let's pivot to Canada, U.S., because I'm sure that's top of mind for a lot of our audience listening today. We are seeing with this president behavior that, as you say, makes the situation very hard to predict. But Janice, doesn't the behavior also court some bigger risks to America's reputation globally? What would be the consequences, Janice, do you think, for the United States if this president, for reasons of self-preservation or his fixation on stock markets or something, decides to, in a sense, exit this war on terms that leave the Iranians not only in place, but he's mused recently, bizarrely, over the last 48 hours about sharing the Straits of Hormuz with Iran, the United States.
With the Ayatollah.
With the Ayatollah, and together, the two of them, I guess, deciding like trolls under a bridge who goes through the straits and what they get. Again, you don't know what's real and what's not, but I want you to talk a little bit about the implications for the United States globally for this war. How is Russia, China, the other big powers looking at it, and what concerns you?
So the erraticism, the incapacity to follow through on a sustained strategy, and we've seen that on tariffs. I know we're going to come and talk about this, Roger, but that is of deep concern to allies. It's also of deep concern to CEOs in the private sector, both in the United States and in the economy that is so interconnected with the United States. You've had the same experience that I've had, Rudyard, when you talk to CEOs. They'll accommodate to almost anything, but what they want is certainty. And they just want to know what the rules of play are. And certainty is the scarcest commodity right now. And so there is a frustration with the United States. For the Russians, this is a gift from heaven, literally. Just a gift to Donald Trump, to Vladimir Putin from Donald Trump.
And I noticed last night there was another major Russian ballistic and drone missile attack on Ukraine. Tragically, more civilian deaths.
Yes, and by the way, the Russians we're not talking about it because there's no airtime, but the Russians have launched quite a significant counteroffensive now, the beginning of the spring counteroffensive against Ukraine. Nobody's paying attention. Billions of dollars are flowing into the Russian economy as they supply scarce oil, so that the constraints that were really pinching Vladimir Putin are gone. Huge win. For China, this is a worrying world. The Chinese, more than anything else, have low tolerance for uncertainty. Now, they're better positioned in many ways than other economies because they've done two things. They've invested massively in renewables, right? And they are the leaders in EVs. We all know that. They're the leaders in solar. But they've also stockpiled oil. A lot. And in that sense, they're better prepared to withstand the supply shocks that you and I were talking about. Asia is just enormously exposed. There is no economy in Asia that doesn't import oil, much of it from the Middle East. And, past presidents were mindful of the consequences for their allies when they dealt with the Middle East. They didn't want to expose Japan and South Korea and others in the region. That's just not true for this president. Either he doesn't know, which is possible, or he doesn't care, frankly. So for the Asians, this is a moment. And as I said, the Gulf is destabilized. There is an interesting debate, and I think it's worth just talking about for just a minute for CPAs, because so many Canadian companies are either invested in the Gulf or have trading relationships with people in the Gulf. There is an argument that the value proposition for the Gulf was its stability. That's true, but the second part of the value proposition for the Gulf was the stability of the tech stack as you went down it. And much of that is still in place. So I think that this is a major setback, but one of the things really to watch for in these stories now, how does the Gulf adjust and reassure customers and investors coming out of this that force majeure is not a one-off? Because you can do that once, maybe twice, but that's all. Investors pay attention to that sort of thing. If anybody is exposed to the uncertainty, and let me come last to Canada, it's Canada. Everything is on the table for Canada. We are still deeply exposed to the U.S. economy. Our supply chains are still integrated into the U.S. economy. And I will say, Rudyard, that I believe that 10 years from now, when we look at our relationship with the United States, the United States will still be a significant trading partner no matter how much we diversify. We can't diversify our way from our geography. No. So for us, this is more than a hinge moment. It's defining.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's switch to Canada and the U.S. relationship. And something you've said to me a number of months ago that really stuck with me, Janice, is this idea that in this new Trump 2.0 world, Canada, in fact, in your estimation as a political scientist, faces, in a sense, some of the biggest risk and the biggest uncertainty. So yes, China and Russia have its problems with this administration. So does Europe. What is unique about Canada's problem vis-a-vis the U.S.? And then we can get into some of the specifics of the current trade negotiations and the upcoming NAFTA renewal.
What's unique about Canada, I think, and this is a candid comment rather than a charitable comment, is that it has been all too easy for Canada to shelter under the umbrella of the United States. It is all too easy for Canadian companies to cross the border and say, well, they're like us. They speak the same language. It's so easy to invest here. It's a safe environment. There's no conceivable threat to the rule of law in the United States. And for a very long time, that was true.
It's also a dynamic economy, much more dynamic than ours.
It's the world's most, it still is. It still is. Donald Trump hasn't changed that. It still is the world's most dynamic economy where most of the innovation actually takes place in the United States. So we were quite rational in what we did. We free rode on the security umbrella of the United States. Well, why wouldn't we? And we invested heavily and traded heavily with a single partner. There's no country in the world that is so exposed to one single trading partner as Canada is to the United States. So we are now looking at this squarely, and our Prime Minister, and this is nonpartisan, I think the leader of the Conservative Party in Canada would agree, frankly, is making a real point of telling us all, diversify your trading relations.
Very difficult to do, though, historically.
Come back to Carol's points here, right? It requires action. It is hard to do. You have to, first of all, there are additional costs because
regulation, language barriers,
all of that. You have to learn about the regulatory structure. You have to understand the language. You have to get to know who's a trusted business partner.
And Janice, the thing I've always thought is you have to displace another company who's already in that market with customers selling goods and services. It's not as if you're walking into a field of dreams here where no one else has planted a flag.
Exactly. And so, again, to tell two stories, Rudyard, I think there are some Canadian CEOs who will say to me, yes, there are risks in the United States. But, in comparison to those risks, the risks of going to Europe, where I don't know the players well, I don't really have anybody on the ground to help.
Much less dynamic economy.
Much less dynamic economy. Over-regulated economy. I don't want to get into that European discussion about cheese. I really don't want to get into that conversation.
Maybe wine.
Maybe. Oh, I would do it for wine in a minute, but I won't do it for cheese.
Okay.
And so I'm gonna I'm going to play the odds and think about the United States 10 years from now and run the risk. That's a story that some CEOs in this country are saying, whereas others are saying.
Well, let me stop you there, because that's, I think, a key point, I'm sure, that's on the mind of a lot of our audience, is the Trump presidency episodic, i.e. it's a breakdown the Canada-US relationship that is driven by one man, his personality, and what are, let's just acknowledge it, very strange theories on trade that are not broadly shared by the U.S. Congress. We've seen a number of congressional leaders come back, and even on the Canada tariffs and sanctions, push back on the president, including some Republicans. So, Janice, how should we look at this? Is this a trend that's not our friend, or is this a mad king who's in charge right now in the United States, and we just have to wait this out?
So let's look at the trend lines here first, right? Because it's all too comforting for all of us to tell ourselves this is a mad king and he can't run again, and this will be.
Well, we don't know.
Yeah, well, I don't think he can. I really don't think. I don't think he intends to do it, in all honesty. But let's look at the trend lines. Donald Trump came to office on a wave of right-wing populism, and on a wave, and I think this is such an important point, and it's really a hard one to make, on a wave of discontent of what democratic governments are able to deliver. And at the forefront of this wave, Rudyard, are the 35-year-olds. And they're not only in the United States, they're in Canada. These younger ones want to buy a house. They want to get married. They want to move out of their parents' basement. It's true in Britain. It's true in France. It's true in Germany. It's true even in easygoing Italy, right? So I think what we have is a much more serious problem than simply Donald Trump himself. We have a crisis in the capacity of democratic states to deliver for this next generation of voters a standard of living which they feel is absolutely fundamental. I say
it's commensurate to the effort that they put into their education, into training, into skills. I mean, you teach these kids; they're incredible at the extent to which they're focused, driven. Yeah. They're doing everything right, but as you say, the bargain was you do everything right and then you get X, Y, and Z.
Yes.
And now X, Y, and Z, a house, a family, a stable income, all that looks increasingly uncertain.
That's right. So when I talk to some of these young people and we talk about this, and they are wonderful, they really are wonderful, I say, well, look, if you were living in New York City, you'd be living in an apartment. So what's so terrible about having children and bringing them up they're absolutely appalled. They're absolutely appalled. So I think part of this is beyond politics, Rudyard. It's an adjustment that's required as we live in cities that are growing and overbuilt, as we face a climate crisis that is intensifying despite what Donald Trump is saying. As we look at, and there's nobody more eloquent on this than you, as these governments across the democratic world face the consequences of overspending and have many, many fewer fiscal resources to invest. And that's part of the problem that this generation of young people is reacting to. All of which to say, I don't think this is going away. This is not the style may go.
The intensity might dial back, but,
that's right.
But the Democrats could be a protectionist party also.
But this democratic deficit, and I'm using that word differently than we did a generation ago, where 35-year-olds are angry and attuned to support populist parties of the left or the right that channel solutions to the concerns that they have and that are, frankly, designed, in fact, to disrupt the system.
Yeah.
I think that's with us.
Yeah, I'd only add that to that list of sins of omission and commission, monetary policy, which
Yes.
since the great financial crisis has been usually quite lax as a way of trying to stimulate growth. And that has led to a huge inflation of asset prices, the very things that this new generation would like to purchase: houses, equity in companies, you name it. It's all very expensive in the context of different types of asset bubbles that have pushed people out of a so-called affordability class. I'm conscious that within 5 minutes we are going to go to your questions. So
Talk about trade for one.
lots coming in, yeah. But I want to wrap up before questions about CUSMA. So we are in a so-called hold pattern with a decision, Janice, to engage with the Americans in what looks increasingly like a bilateral, not a trilateral discussion with Mexico about the renewal of CUSMA. Where is this discussion at right now?
Yeah.
What are decision makers telling you? What are your own instincts expressing? And are we going to be able to successfully renew this agreement with the United States?
So you're right, we're in a holding pattern. We have an entirely new team on the ground in Washington. Mark Wiseman, who comes from the private sector and the financial sector, and will think not only about a trade deal, but will think about a grand bargain. What other assets can we put on the table in order to change the incentive structure to renew CUSMA? So, for example, is it not only trade but security? Is it trade and defense? I mean, how do you package the assets so that the deal as a whole becomes more attractive to this president and his team? And I think that's where the work is focused right now.
But just on that point, Janice, I mean, Canadian politics is running
The opposite direction.
180 degrees the opposite direction, and especially because of this war in Iran, there's a increasing heightened sense of insecurity. So how do you as a prime minister or as a trade negotiator go back and argue to the Canadian public, guess what? We're now going into business with the Mad King, and we're going to, entwine not only our economies, but our security. Isn't the whole purpose of this current moment to diversify not only our trade, but our security arrangements away from the United States?
So I think it's very, very, very important that we give the Prime Minister and his team some room to maneuver here, because geography is not destiny, but it's the closest thing to destiny that I know. And one of the distinctions I make all the time, Rudyard, is between Americans and the U.S. government. More than 50% of Americans are deeply unhappy with their U.S. government right now. So half the Americans that you meet either in Canada or elsewhere in the world, or when you do business in the United States, are unhappier than Canadians are with their government and more exposed, frankly, to their government. It's important that we keep our options open. Because my hunch, and that's all it is, it's not a likelihood, it's not a probability. My hunch is that we will come out of this with a renewed agreement that will look different from the agreement. The old CUSMA will change, but that it will be a larger bargain than simply a trade bargain. Let me give you one really concrete example here, all right? And you'll see how hard this is, which is we ordered 88 F-35s. These are advanced fighter aircrafts that are made by Lockheed Martin. The Prime Minister paused on all but 18, which we pay for, and there's an active discussion about whether we buy a Swedish fighter or not. Well, all the rest of NATO uses F-35. If you want to be what's called interoperable, if you want to be able to work closely with the air forces, not of the United States, but of Britain, France, Germany, Italy, they are all using F-35s. So yes, it's true that if the President of the United States were to say, get up one morning and be really angry with us, and that's not hard, because that's happened, and say to Lockheed Martin, you can't send any software updates for that F-35, they could be forced to do that. But that would be such an own goal against one of his big primes. And that's the important thing to remember. They need us. It is not only that we need them, they need us. We have assets in this conversation. Did you talk about fertilizer? Was Carol?
I talked about Russians banning
Yes.
fertilizer exports.
We are a huge fertilizer export.
Yeah,
And we can
nitrogen.
do more than we're doing right now. We are a uranium exporter. We are an energy exporter. In this conversation, Canada has assets. Let's keep our options open and see where, in fact, the best opportunities are, because we need to increase the productivity of this Canadian economy.
I hope so, Janice. I think there's a lot of, understandably, a lot of anti-Americanism in the country right now, led by Trump, and I think it creates a difficult political environment, let's say, on dairy subsidies, one of the probably the most, in some people's views, kind of egregious taxes on Canadians that leads to a deep irritant with this president in Wisconsin, a battleground state. That alone would require huge political capital to undo. That's just one, probably, of a laundry list or a butcher's bill that the president and his trade negotiators have in mind.
In a province where we may have a referendum.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Let's go to questions, because we've got a lot coming in here, and I'm going to stay on the U.S. theme for a little bit, and then we'll kind of jump around. So Robin is asking about leverage. What leverage do we have with the U.S.? If we wanted to play elbows up, so to speak, and really try to maximize these negotiations and create a real set of pain points for the Americans, if they, as some are arguing, it seems more recently, an interest possibly in walking away from a comprehensive deal, what would we do? What cards could we play?
So we have leverage, right? And this is the argument that we need to make over and over and over again. Where's our leverage? The United States needs uranium, not only for its nuclear programs, but for some of its advanced manufacturing. The only other global suppliers of uranium are Russia and Kazakhstan. It is not conceivable that the United States will want to buy uranium from them. They want all our uranium and more. And that's why Donald Trump has never put a tariff on uranium exports, okay?
But he's done it on aluminum, despite much of the North American aluminum smelting capacity being in Canada, not the U.S.
Yes, and that's because there's a domestic lobby. All right. And so both of us, the Canadian delegation and the U.S. delegation, when we get to the hard strokes, you know this from past trade agreements, you have to lock the door and keep the domestic constituencies out and think about the larger economic advantage. Every time we've had trade negotiations, going back to the 1980s, there have been disappointed stakeholders who are unable to protect their own industries. The same is true in the United States, but in the aluminum industry in the United States, we have significant members who are furious about this tariff because they are closely integrated with us. We have CEOs of big car manufacturing companies in the United States who are pushing Donald Trump to renew the part of the agreement that deals with an integrated auto sector because they see advantages to their companies in getting parts shipped over the border from Canada. Now, it's true that some of our own parts manufacturers have moved to get behind that tariff wall, but that's a grim story for Canada, and that's in part why this agreement matters to us. Fertilizer, nutrient, and others in our prairie provinces. Let's not talk about the holy grail here, water. Electricity exports. There are a whole series of things that the United States, and here's the big one to me, Rudyard, okay, which we don't talk about. Actually, the United States can't defend itself over the pole without close collaboration with us. And that's a very, very important asset as we move into a world of longer range ballistic missiles and drones. They need us.
Joshua has an excellent question here, Janice, saying, in a sense, what does this Iran war potentially do to Trump's political and other kind of condition vis-a-vis then the negotiations with Canada? Because if this war, as it is, doesn't seem to be going particularly well for the president, and there will be political repercussions in the midterm elections, let's hypothesize. Let's do a little bit of scenario analysis. If Donald Trump, let's say, loses control of the Congress with the midterms, what does that, as a result, primarily of the inflation, shock that's going to come through, regardless now of this Iran war, what does that do to the trade negotiations?
So there's a paradox here, right? I think the inflation shock weakens the president really badly. Inflation is corrosive of the middle class, and you never recover from each round of inflation. You start afterwards where some of the value of your core assets have eroded, and that's why it is so corrosive of middle class support of a president. What does that mean in practice? He loses control of the House to the Democrats. Are the Democrats free traders? Not last time I looked. Frankly. So I think we have to be very careful and understand that a Democratic House may be no easier, and they will be more empowered than the current House is. They will have more influence on the White House than the current House does, but they may be no more friendly to trade agreements than the House that we have right now. I know Canadians are crossing their fingers and hoping for a rout in the election, but that is a fact. Democrats are not notoriously in favor of free trade agreements.
Yeah, I think one thing I've taken away from a lot of this discussion around the renewal of CUSMA is that CUSMA right now is ratified by Congress. So there are a variety of American domestic laws that were changed to enforce the agreement, the treaty. Undoing that is not in the president's power. So I see a win in November by the Democrats, even if they're not free trade friendly, as creating another hurdle for this president to undo the reality of CUSMA. He might choose to, try to slap more emergency tariffs on us, or this new tariff procedure of researching supposed, breaches of trade protocol with the U.S. and then using those supposed breaches to enforce more tariffs. That's all possible. But Janice, isn't it correct that it's harder to undo NAFTA than maybe some people assume?
That's right, and that's why I'm reasonably optimistic, Richard. Okay, it is harder to undo. There is a bias in favor of the status quo. Let me put it to you that way, and that's why if I were thinking about 2 years from now, I probably, and I should be very careful and don't follow this advice and do your homework, everybody, I would probably make a bet that we will have some version of this agreement in place, actually.
Jing is asking what Canadian industries besides energy are going to be impacted by global events right now?
Everything. Literally everything. First of all, when inflation roars through, it impacts absolutely everything. Secondly, we're going to have gummed up, sticky supply chains. So you all remember that during the COVID period. And it's, you don't know where stuff, we have ships in the Gulf, trapped behind the Straits of Hormuz. We have ships outside of the Gulf. This is going to affect everything to do with advanced manufacturing, because that all runs on computer chips. And the LNG shortage is going to affect the manufacturing of computer chips. There's nothing in our economy that doesn't run on that. So if you just take that one example, let's just take two that are going to get gummed up. Computer chips, which runs, I don't know, every one of you has a smartphone in your pocket, all right? And then food, because of the spring planting season is...
Fertilizer costs.
Fertilizer.
Yeah.
That's right. And those are going to increase. So frankly, everything will be affected by this.
Yeah. As we push towards the top of the hour, we're going to get two final questions in, and then we're going to throw it back to Carol. David is asking, was the vision outlined in Mark Carney's Davos speech realistic? And can Canada pursue a kind of alliance of the middle powers as a bona fide, geopolitical risk hedge
What a great
for the
question.
country?
What a great question. To cut short a long answer, the answer is that is not what he said. Okay, he did not really talk about an alliance of middle powers. And I'm really glad he didn't, because that's really tough to do. He talked about he used a really wonky word called variable geometry. But what that means, Rudyard, is when I've got an issue in the Arctic, I go pick 2 or 3 Arctic partners. I don't need everybody. I just need enough in that coalition to push that issue forward. That is entirely doable. If I'm worried about AI and AI regulation, and we have good reason at times to worry about that, I'm going to go to the United Kingdom, and I'm going to go to 2 or 3 others in Asia, and I'm going to craft a small group, and we're going to push that forward, and we're going to leave the naysayers behind.
Just to be a little bit of a naysayer, though, Janice, when historically is there an example of that working? Because it seems like there are historical phases where we create things like the WTO because we want to solve trade broadly. We're not trying to create little alliances to solve, I don't know, back to your cheese dislike, to solve, fat quotas in cheese. And on the other end of the extreme, we, let's say on tech, we have the Americans saying, no, thank you very much. You're accepting our tech standards. Our policy is the de facto policy, and if you go against it, we will punish you in trade negotiations or in other ways.
Yeah.
So to what extent is this idea actually realistic, either historically or operationally?
So I think it is realistic. Right? Let me give you, this is a funny example I'm going to give you. What a terrible name for this. It's called ICE, which nobody in their right mind right now would use as a name, but it has to do with icebreaker making. Right? We need heavy water icebreakers. We cannot have an ounce of sovereignty in the North if we don't have heavy water icebreakers. Well, we got together with Finland and the United States to share advanced technology about icebreakers. Only 3 countries, right? There is the Indo-Pacific Economic Forum. It doesn't include everybody in the Indo-Pacific. But those countries who are in a shared advanced technology, there's a whole series of what I call stand-up, nimble, fast organizations, small, 10 members, 8 members now, that populate the environment, that are actually, I'm going to be careful because this is a public broadcast, getting stuff done, I'm going to say. And just compare those to the clunky, old, tired United Nations and WTO that has everybody in them. The goal is not everybody. The goal is not every middle power. It's those middle powers who want to go. The real question is, can we get our own government going, especially below the political level, in a timely enough way?
Well, it's a monk debate for another day, but I would just say that, all that's great, that policy innovation, but it doesn't work when great powers can suddenly step in and say, guess what? It's our rules, and we appreciate what you've done here, but our way or the highway. Let's go to our last closing question, and then we're going to throw it back to Carol, and it comes from Pritpal, who's asking, what are 2 or 3 geopolitical scenarios companies should realistically plan for in the next 3 years? That goes back to what you opened with, which is this idea of a scenario analysis. If we're to cast our mind forward, and you wanted to create 3 baskets of things to look at or specific issues, what would they be? Would climate be one of them?
Yes, because I think I just saw data that was just published last week, which says that global warming is proceeding much more quickly than the model suggested, right? And so that's a really important one. That has to be a variable geometry answer. We can't wait for everybody. There has to be a group of countries that move forward. So that's one for sure. The second nightmare scenario, so I just told you a good one. There's a coalition of countries that say, okay, Washington, you're not doing this, that's okay. We'll go forward, you'll catch up to us. Here's the nightmare one. China invades Taiwan. And if this war ends very badly and the United States really backs down and gets nothing for it, I can assure you Xi Jinping is paying attention to that on an issue that's very, very important to him. And I think there's the third scenario, which I think is critically important, and Rudyard, you've spoken a lot about this, is telling stories about advanced technology, particularly AI, and its impact on the labor force in all our democratic countries. That's an absolutely crucial one. And in each one of these, there's more than one story to tell.
Yeah, so we have to kind of chunk those three scenarios, Taiwan, China, Russia's done it, the United States has done it, is the next great power about to do it. And finally, AI and the white-collar workforce.
And climate.
Yeah. Janice, any final thought, words, thank you want to offer the audience?
Grow your tolerance for uncertainty. And here's how I think about it, because we all are more comfortable when we feel in control. But this is a world that is being remade. And this country is being remade now. It really is. It's got to change its path. There's no choice. And so do we come out of this stronger, more innovative, more adaptive, once the easy road is close to us?
Well said. Well, Janice, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights with the audience today. Thank you, audience members, for some great questions, and thank you for including me in this discussion. Also, I'm now going to throw it back to Carol.
Thank you both, Professor Stein, Rudyard. Just an incredible, engaging, and thought-provoking conversation. That's a lot to pack in an hour, and absolutely fabulous. As Professor Stein said, certainty is the scarcest commodity, and I think you said just a moment ago, get more comfortable with uncertainty. But I love the comment, tell yourself 2 or 3 stories and then track the indicators in terms of the possible outcomes. That's a way to help us cope through the uncertainty piece of it. Look, our thanks to everyone for attending our Insight Speaker Series this afternoon. As a reminder, this session will be available on our website at cpaontario.ca/insights. On behalf of all of us at CPA Ontario, have a great afternoon. Thanks, everyone.